Raquel Coombs, Police Constable 353, and I'm here with your crime prevention tip of the day. When shopping, hold your bag close to your body with your arm through the strap. It is not wise to keep your purse in your handbag either. Handbags can be the perfect targets for thieves to snatch easily. Do not display large quantity of cash in public. When storing cash, do it carefully and look around to see if anyone is paying particular attention to your activity. This is your crime prevention tip of the day. Have a safe and productive day, everyone.
Thinking of winning the lotto jackpot? Well, there is an easy way. Combo Play. Choose 4 numbers from 1 to 36. That's a combo 4 at a cost of $64. Match any 4 of the 5 numbers and win the lotto jackpot. There's Combo 6, where you purchase 6 numbers for only $12. Match any 5 of the 6 lotto numbers and hit the jackpot. How about Combo 7? That's a purchase of 7 lotto numbers for $42. Match any 5 of the 7 numbers and you will win the jackpot. There are also Combo 3, Combo 8, and Combo 9 lotto plays. Visit the NLA headquarters in Pauls Avenue or WhatsApp 495-6886 for more details. Lotto, you have to be in it to win it.
Good evening and welcome to this week's edition of Roundtable Talk. This evening, the focus is on Methodism here in St. Vincent and the Grenadines and the rest of the region and its contribution to development. To talk the talk this evening, we have in studio Dr. Adrian Fraser. We also have economist and lay preacher Laura Anthony Brown. And we have the Superintendent Minister of the Kingstown Chateaubalais Circuit, Reverend Philbert Delaney. Welcome, ladies and gentlemen, to the studio and to the program.
Thank you.
Today is an important date on the Methodist Church's calendar, May 24th, Aldersgate Day. What is Aldersgate Day and why is it important in the history of the Methodist Church?
Okay.
I don't know if the historian or anybody can respond.
Aldersgate is a street in London, and it is on that street that there was a Moravian religious society. And on the 24th of May 1738, John Wesley on that evening went unwillingly to that society, and while there, as he heard someone reading from Luther's preface to the book of Romans, he indicated that he felt his heart strangely warmed. It is because of that situation that we have the name Aldersgate. It is out of that whole renewal experience that John Wesley would have experienced on 24th of May 1738 and Charles a few days earlier on the 21st of May, that eventually through the intervention of their friend George Whitefield, they became involved in the Great Revival movement. By the time that John and Charles got involved in this revival movement, George had already left to carry out similar work in the United States. So the whole Methodist movement, and the whole question of the name Methodist we will discuss a little later, but the whole Methodist movement would have been birthed out of that revival movement. So number one, we understand how we got to Aldersgate, and number two, out of the movement now, as we seek to celebrate Methodism, we always link it back to 24th of May, 1738.
Okay, and you mentioned the names Wesley, John and Charles. What is their role, or what was their role in the evolution of the Methodist religion?
They were both Anglican priests. And so even though they were involved in an activity that normally they would not be involved in, because it was not common in those days for priests in the Anglican Church to be involved in outdoor services, particularly in the kind of robust manner that John and Charles would have undertaken it, going to all sorts of conditions of persons. And it is interesting to note that they continued this robust effort of seeking to bring salvation to the lives of men and women all the way through until their death. Quite interestingly, they both remained as Anglican priests up to the time of their transition. So the Methodist Church, as it began to blossom, was in fact a sect within the Anglican Church, but the movement continued to spread.
So is it fair to say that Methodism was a breakaway from Anglicanism?
It is true to say that, because after Wesley's death, those who were involved in the Methodist movement, particularly those who were providing leadership at the time, particularly bearing in mind the kind of divisions that were beginning to develop, and divisions coming out of a situation where the Methodists would have been proclaiming something that the Anglicans would have felt a little uneasy about. For example, when Methodism started, slavery was still in existence. And one of the things that John Wesley would have fought against was slavery. And particularly reaching a point where he would even have preached about equality. So when you talk about equality between the master and the servant, or the master and the slave, that was something that was a little uneasy. So with things like that happening, eventually the members of the movement sought to break away from the Anglican Church.
Okay, Dr. Fraser, what was the historical background surrounding the evolution of Methodism, if you will?
Well, just to note, first of all, that after that event of 1738, it was 49 years after that Methodism really reached to St. Vincent. The 9th of January 1787, Methodists, well, Dr. Cook, who was in Antigua, came to St. Vincent, and in St. Vincent, they met with Mr. Claxton, who previously resided in Antigua and had been converted to Methodism. So, and it started in a period of slavery, and as you're told just now, one of the things about John Wesley is that from very early, he came out strongly against the slave trade and against slavery. And, you know, that is my particular interest in him, because at that time, when he wrote his thoughts on slavery in 1774, even though there were individuals who were expressing their disgust with slavery, there was no organized movement. And I think that one of the problems with the Methodists when they started in St. Vincent was that because of John Wesley being the head of the fountain and had expressed so strongly his thoughts on slavery, the reception given to the early Methodist missionaries, I think, also had something to do with that. But generally, it was in a slave period, and it was very difficult to be able to survive. And so the interesting thing is that the Methodist missionaries who came to St. Vincent, and they started actually in the warehouse, the law residence of the same Mr. Claxton, and they grew from there. Their first emphasis was really on the indigenous people, but they did not achieve a lot of success, except to say that Dr. Coke had written to John Wesley, pointing out to him that the son of Chatoyer, John Dimmy, was being tutored by two of the missionaries who were based in St. Vincent. But apart from that, the indigenous people at that time were strongly against the British, and the Methodists suffered because of that. But despite all of that, they began to focus their attention on the enslaved, and I think that is where they made their mark in St. Vincent and really established themselves. And we could come back to that later on.
Okay, so would you say that there was some difficulty in Methodists' penetration into the society then?
There was some difficulty
In the penetration of Methodism within the society at the time?
Yeah, because the planters were very much against the missionaries. And it came at a time, and shortly after, you began to have the development of the anti-slavery movement in England, and they felt that the missionaries were an essential part of that movement. So you had a lot of, in fact, in 1 year, I think 17, I can't remember which was, they actually broke into the Methodist chapel, which was established at that time, damaged the building, stole a Bible, and hung the Bible because they said that the missionaries, the Wesleyan missionaries, were subversive people. And there's also a particular time, I think around 1790, 1791, when, again, to get back at the Methodist missionaries, what they did was to pass a license stating that you will not be allowed to preach unless you had a license, and you have to be resident in St. Vincent for 12 months before you could get that license. Now, one of the missionaries, a Mr. Lum, refused to give in to that, so he was imprisoned and spent a while there before Dr. Coke from Antigua came to St. Vincent after hearing about that, went to England, and was able to get the people in England to pardon him shortly after he left. But around that same time, interestingly enough, when you also had the same kind of attitude taken out in Barbados against the Wesleyans, and there's a Shrewsbury, Preacher Shrewsbury, whose house was burglarized in the chapel, and he and some of the missionaries who came to St. Vincent left diaries, and they were able to record based on the songs from it, some of what they say, and they really understood what was going on, and they interpreted the Bible in the way they wanted to. So despite all of those obstacles, they were able to get around it, and in fact some of the planters gave into that and welcomed them on the plantation, because one of the problems which they had to face is that they had to make sure if they wanted to get to the enslaved, they depended on the planters to allow them to go on the estates, and therefore they had to be careful how they. So it was really quite a lot of problems surviving and preaching in that kind of atmosphere.
Okay, thanks for that. We'll take our first break, and when we come back, we'll talk some more about the main elements of Methodism. And I'm also a little curious as to why John and Charles, even though they introduced Methodism, why they remained as Anglican priests in the entire process. We'll take a break and come right back.
You can increase your chances of winning the Super 6 jackpot with a combo play. Remember, Super 6 numbers are from 1 to 28. Choose any 5 Super 6 numbers. That's a combo 5 for $69. Match any 5 of the 6 numbers and you will win the jackpot. Choose 7 Super 6 numbers for $21. Match any 6 of the 7 numbers and win the jackpot. There's more. Combo 8, where you purchase 8 Super 6 numbers for $84. Match any 6 of the 8 numbers and you will win the jackpot. There are also Combo 3 and Combo 4 Super 6 plays. Visit the NLA headquarters in Pauls Avenue or WhatsApp 495-6886 for more details. Super 6, bigger jackpots, more chances to win.
Hello everyone, my name is Raquel Coombs, Police Constable 353, and I'm here with your crime prevention tip of the day. When shopping, hold your bag close to your body with your arm through the strap. It is not wise to keep your purse in your handbag either. Handbags can be the perfect targets for thieves to snatch easily. Do not display large quantity of cash in public. When storing cash, do it carefully and look around to see if anyone is paying particular attention to your activity. This is your crime prevention tip of the day. Have a safe and productive day, everyone.
Welcome back. To begin this second segment, I'm going to ask Laura Anthony Brown, since we haven't heard her since we started, what are the main elements of Methodism? And do they really differ significantly from Anglicanism?
Well, I would prefer to pass that question in terms of the subtle differences that there are to the Reverend. What I'd rather speak about more is the economic impact, or the impact, not the economic impact so much, but the impact on the development of Methodism to St. Vincent and the Grenadines. So I don't know if you want to take that now, or you want to go to the question to Reverend Delaney.
I'll take that a little later. We get to that impact a little later.
Yeah, so let's just,
So you'd prefer
the
Reverend
pastor
Delaney to
speak
talk
about
about
the
the elements of
differences. Yes,
Methodism?
yes.
Okay,
Okay.
okay, sure.
Now, I want us to recognize that the environment in Britain at the time of John Wesley and the revival movement was one where you had the very respectable persons in the church, but there were a lot of social decay otherwise. Harlots, thieves, prostitutes, you had the mine workers, and you really had a situation where the society was sort of divided in two. The revival movement was not geared towards the people in the church, even though some of them would have been converted under the preaching of John and Charles and the other helpers. The real question of trying to turn around the society would have been reaching out to those persons who were seen as the undesirables in society. And John would have gone up and down across the landscape, seeking to bring the gospel to those persons. Now, you may ask the question, why is it in an environment like that did he not break away from the Anglican Church at the very beginning? Well, because you see, there are two things. Number one, he was a part of the establishment of the Anglican Church. His whole background, his whole family background, his grandfather on both sides, maternal and paternal grandparents, were Methodist priests. His father was a Methodist priest. His elder brother was a Methodist priest. And then, of course, you had him and his younger brother becoming a Methodist priest. I want us also to connect to something here. The Anglican Church was not established in the same way that you might see many denominations today being established, where someone breaks away and starts a church. The Methodist Church, as you remember, the Anglican Church, as you remember, would have been established because of Henry VIII wanted to marry a divorced woman. And after the Pope had pushed back on that, eventually the king declared himself to be the head of the church. And so that one of the things that came out, and as I read about the story of John Wesley and his household, is that they were very loyal to the monarch. And I believe that this loyalty to the monarch, as well as the fact that the Anglican Church would have been the main established church, although some years earlier in 1689 they had passed a law in Britain that other religious bodies could be existing, could coexist, you will recognize that they would not have been established like the Church of England. And so John would have preferred to remain. And as he put it, while he remained loyal to the Anglican Church, and at one point he made a statement that even after his death and the death of those who were with him, they would still have been in the Anglican Church. So you can see that he really had no desire at all to break away. His desire really was to bring persons to a saving knowledge of Jesus Christ. And that was the key thing for him. Of course, as we all know, that doesn't always work out the way, the kind of laid back way that we may want it. Sometimes a lot of these things bring about aggression and revolutionary change. And that is what would have happened through the intervention of the persons who wanted to break away from the Anglican Church. Now let's go back to the doctrines a little bit. One of the things that John Wesley would have experienced during the 24th of May spiritual renewal experience is that for the first time he was trusting simply in Jesus. He was not trying to earn salvation by works as he was doing before. He recognized that if he was going to have peace with God, it was going to come through him simply trusting Jesus. And I'm sure that as he preached to persons under the four basic platforms of the first basic anchors of our doctrines, he would have indicated that to them. Even up to this day, simply trusting Jesus. So what are these four religious platforms? I must point out to you that the Methodist Church believes in the Christian doctrines. There's no such thing as Christian doctrine and then Methodist doctrine, because if you say that, you're actually saying that Methodism is not Christian. So Methodism is Christian. However, the doctrinal emphasis that we have built the movement on, four of them: universal sin. All persons are sinners and need to be saved. And that is based on Scripture. Romans chapter 3 verse 23. All have sinned and come short of the glory of God. The other platform, or pillar if you want to use that term, all persons can be saved through faith in Jesus Christ. All persons. And I want to make the point that when we say all persons are sinners, we have an inclination many times to think of the worst of the lot. But we need to recognize that all persons also means those who think that they are good. And John recognized that for his own self, that he needed to be saved. He needed to experience that conversion, as we call it. So all persons can be saved through faith in Jesus Christ is based on Ephesians chapter 2, verse 8. And again, it means that even the worst person that we may identify in our nation or in the world, that person can be saved. Simply by confessing their sins, giving their heart to the Lord Jesus Christ, that person can be saved. No one is outside the saving grace of Jesus Christ. And then the third element, all persons can know that they are saved. And what it speaks of here is the transformative work of the Holy Spirit inside of us, bearing witness that indeed we are children of God. And that is based on Romans chapter 8. And it's important for us to recognize that once we have accepted Jesus Christ, the work of the Holy Spirit continues unabated as long as we remain in Christ. And that brings us to the last platform, and that is all persons can be saved to the uttermost, or what we may call Christian perfection, or entire sanctification, or perfect love. It is not a claim that any of us will reach the point of being so perfect that we don't sin, even the sin of the ignorance about the future. We will never reach that point. No matter how long we live, we will still need God's saving grace. However, though, we can so grow in the Lord, becoming more and more like Him, becoming holier, and the word sanctification is a very important Methodist term because it speaks about not only holy living, but the actual radical change that starts from the inside out, where we are transformed and made more like Christ. And so those are the basic things that would have been different to the Anglican Church. There's also one very important thing, and that John would have indicated, that all of us are priests, the priesthood of all believers. And that is not something that would have been said loosely. It's recognizing that as a believer, we can come to God not only for our own needs and the needs of others. We can claim forgiveness of sins and we can claim healing on behalf of others. That we don't have to go through our priests in the chapel, the cathedral, or wherever to pray on our behalf. So the priesthood of all believers would have been a dividing line. There's some others that we can talk about as we go along.
Okay. What would you say has been the importance of Methodism, not just in St. Vincent and the Grenadines, but regionally? Because I suspect the experiences across the region would be similar.
Okay. It is very interesting that Dr. Adrian talked about the violence that the missionaries encountered against them when they came here. The truth is that John Wesley and Charles, as they went about from one place to the next across England, they encountered a whole lot of violence because persons were trying to stop this movement of change, this movement of liberation for persons who were in bondage, either socially because of the kind of social standards that were prevailing in their lives, or even in terms of them finding now a place that God's grace has a place for them, that they're important in the eyes of God. And so the main message across these Caribbean islands is a message of socialization, a message that yes, don't matter what situation you may be in, God loves you. That don't matter how much you may fall into sin, God can redeem you. That don't matter what other persons may think about you, you can grow and become more like Christ. The Methodist Church sought and still seek to break down the social barriers in society, so that someone who may be the servant can end up being the class leader of someone who may be the mistress or master. That there wasn't, we tried to break down those social classes. Now I must admit that is not always the easiest thing to do in these islands, particularly bearing in mind that persons who are facing hardships in their lives, they don't have the money, and many times they have to depend on wealthy people. But we do thank God for a number of wealthy persons who would have been converted under the Methodist Church, and they offer their funds, they use their funds in order to help to propel the work of the Methodists. The other thing that the Methodist Church can take a bow about across these islands, and particularly the South Caribbean, is the area of education. That as Dr. Adrian would have mentioned, that the missionaries sought to educate the enslaved, and even when slavery was abolished, to sought to educate those who are less well off in society. Hence the reason why we had a number of Methodist schools scattered across the island, right, of St. Vincent. And we must thank God for those persons who had the foresight to work with the education system and to educate our people. There was a time when we were children when a lot of the high-paying jobs were held by whites. You go through St. Vincent now, the highest level jobs are held by ordinary St. Vincent, ordinary Vincentians. And we have to recognize the hand of the Methodist Church in educating people and encouraging them to further their education. And later on, before we close, I will tell you about an initiative that we are currently embarking on.
We will definitely speak some more about the educational impact of Methodism and that legacy. I myself can say that I was educated at the Bible Methodist School before going to high school. So I've been a beneficiary of that kind of advocacy and activism. We'll take our second break and come back in just a short moment.
Here's your chance to win even more from the National Lotteries Authority when you play for 2 times daily. Choose 4 numbers from 0 to 9 and you can win up to $5,000 with a $1 inline bet.
Make sport and back it up too. That's right. There'll be lots of cash waiting for you.
Get your tickets Monday to Saturday for the Play 4 midday draw at 1:50 p.m. and the Play 4 night draw 9 p.m. So easy to play.
For, you'll win even more.
Welcome back. Before we took our last break, we touched somewhat briefly on the educational impact and legacy of the Methodist Church. And I know Laura wanted to talk about the economic impact because there has been economic impact, there's been social impact. So let's talk about that area from the economic standpoint, Laura.
I may have misspoken when I said economic. I think I meant more developmental impact, because development is a very strange word in a lot of ways. Because when you think of development, you know, people think generally of the gross domestic product, gross national product, you know, per capita income. People think about levels of employment or unemployment. They think about poverty and those types of things. But, you know, I am rather intrigued by a work done years ago by the murdered Guyanese intellectual Walter Rodney, who mentioned that development really is contextually about people. Yes, in people's increasing capacity to do things in terms of their freedom, in terms of their creativity, self-discipline, and all of that. And then in 2015, the international community developed the Sustainable Development Goals, which gave a yardstick for development, how countries develop, what are the things you should look for. So when Methodism entered the system, you heard from Dr. Fraser, and that in 1718, Methodism came to the shores of St. Vincent and the Grenadines. So what we might ask, the question we might ask is, where were we? Where was St. Vincent and the Grenadines at that time? So if we're able to understand the level of development of Methodism or the contribution of Methodism to the country's development. Again, we heard that it was a plantation economy. It's 1787. It was still the period of slavery. And so it came into an environment which was pretty much anti. It was not a welcoming environment. Why was it was not a welcoming environment? Because it was slavery still. And we heard that John Wesley, our founder, he was really very much opposed to the whole system of slavery. In fact, he argued in the essay that Dr. Fraser mentioned, which was written in 1774, Thoughts on Slavery, that it were better if the islands were to be left undeveloped rather than to be developed at such an expense of such as slavery. He said that slavery and the slave trade is the worst thing that of all the evils that there are. Slavery was the worst of them. And so with him enthrusting or Methodism coming to the Caribbean, coming to St. Vincent with such anti-slavery sentiments, it was not perhaps the most receptive climate for Methodism. But what happened? In March of this year, one of our schools, the Westwood Methodist School, celebrated 112 years as an educational institution in this country. What did the Methodist Church do? It established schools throughout the length and breadth of this country. The Chateaubelair Methodist School, the Westwood Methodist, the Rose Hall Methodist, and so on and so forth. So in every village almost, there was a Methodist school established. And you yourself, Teresa, you have mentioned that you were a beneficiary. The Spring Village Methodist School, I went to about 5. The Westwood Methodist School, I went to about 5 of those primary schools. Not that I was a bad person, but just the luck of the draw that I happened to be moving around quite often in the primary school level. So education is the hallmark. It's the most important contribution that the Methodist Church has made to the development of this country. Many persons, as you heard Reverend Delaney say, in the public service, across the public service, you see so many ordinary persons who are holding positions of responsibility. This is because they had an opportunity. They had an opportunity to become equal with their masters, with the people who control them, so that they can educate themselves and later educate their children. The Methodist Church also contributed significantly to the social fabric of the nation, in that a lot of the social issues were discussed. It encouraged justice, social justice, and encourage people to seek justice. So these are some of the main areas that we would say that the Methodist Church contributed to the development of the country. Can we translate those into dollars? If you give us enough time, we can tell you the dollar cost of this contribution.
Thank you. Dr. Fraser?
Well, just to add to what was said, I'm just looking at some numbers. If you take the year 1893, when there were 44 schools in St. Vincent, most of the schools were religious schools. By 1893, you had a government-owned school at Windsor Forest and at Walliboo. But of the other 42 schools, the Anglicans had 20, the Methodists 19, and the Catholics 3. And I just want to mention the areas where the Methodist schools were, that is in 1893. Brighton, Calliope, Belair, Sion Hill, Kingston, Chauncey, Georgetown, Waterloo, Dixon's, Union, Mariquois, Evesham, Mount Coke, Bible, Chateaublair, Westwood, Barry, Leo, and Hope. I did not know until recently that there was actually a Methodist school in Barry, but at that time they were 19. And the thing about education is that even at that time in England, the education was mainly in the hands of religious groups. So the same thing happened. The government could not undertake that. They asked the Methodist groups and they asked the religious groups, and the Methodists, because they had been working with the enslaved and with the colored, played a very important role in terms of spreading that education. Also, there was a period, I think in 1853, when the grant which the imperial government had given to the region to develop education, that ended, and the legislature took over in 1853. They made a grant for education, but this lapsed in 1854, and they never followed upon it, simply because they were more interested in things like immigration and things which were of concern to them. Fortunately for the Methodists, because some of the Anglican schools had to be closed, fortunately for the Methodists, they were getting support from the Missionary Society in England, so they were able to continue some of their schools. And that kind of bond and the enthusiasm with which some of these people greeted what the Methodists were saying was very important. And there are reports by some of these missionaries who speak. One gentleman, let me see, he said the way the people, he said hundreds, this is James Bickford, who came from England. in November 1838, and he was preaching at Georgetown, and he said hundreds upon hundreds could not get inside the building, but had to come within earshot on the outside and get as much religious instruction as was possible under the circumstances. He went on to say, such a hunger for the word of God I had never seen before in England or elsewhere. So St. Vincent Methodism just spread. In fact, in 1817, I think it was, when there were 2,700 people who had committed themselves to the church. In Barbados, there were only 50. And compared to the other islands, it really spread in St. Vincent. The people were very into, and all of the missionaries really spoke about the way the people came to church and the way they responded. So that was a very important, because here were people who were enslaved, who were just beginning, particularly in the period of the emancipation, just beginning to find it, and needed all the psychological comfort and so on to be able to allow them to go on. And this is where the Methodist Church played an important role, because their focus was on the enslaved and the colored.
Okay. We'll take a final break and come back and talk a little bit more about present-day Methodism compared to Methodism of the 1870s when we come back.
Everyone, my name is Raquel Coombs, Police Constable 353, and I'm here with your crime prevention tip of the day. When shopping, hold your bag close to your body with your arm through the strap. It is not wise to keep your purse in your handbag either. Handbags can be the perfect targets for thieves to snatch easily. Do not display large quantity of cash in public. When storing cash, do it carefully and look around to see if anyone is paying particular attention to your activity. This is your crime prevention tip of the day. Have a safe and productive day, everyone.
Welcome back. Reverend Delaney, I know you spoke earlier on about the fact that Methodism sought to break down social barriers. I'm wondering whether or not in present day society, if the role or mandate of Methodism has changed, has transformed. Is it the same?
It has not changed. It is the same, even though we recognize that the problems are different. So, for example, we no longer have the kind of slavery that we had when the missionaries first came. But we have some social issues that have the same impact as slavery. That means enslaving persons. For example, human trafficking has now become a feature in the Caribbean that as a church we cannot afford to just sit back and not seek to awaken an awareness to it. In addition to that, and I'm going to use an illustration that might be a little controversial here. Across these islands, gambling is now 24/7. And you have to ask yourself, who are the persons engaged the most in gambling? And it is hardly the persons that have enough, and the money, they use their money wisely and whatnot. Sometimes some very poor persons who cannot even afford their particular living standard waste their monies and then have to come begging for funds. In addition to that, the whole idea of the abuse of substances are affecting our people very badly. And so our call for persons to live holy lives, our call for persons to live lives that are not only holy scripturally, but also in terms of their good health. The verse in 3rd Epistle of John, verse 2 is still very important. I pray that you may be in good health, just as it is well with your soul. And the Methodist Church is interested in the good health of persons. And we will continue to push that agenda, helping persons to maintain good health. At the moment, we have 8 preschools. And I know that the impression may be given that we are no longer involved in education, which is not really true. And in fact, I want to indicate that in 2019, under our current district bishop, who is of Ascension, Reverend Derry A. Richards of Ascension, we started a Methodist schools development program. We started that in the nations where we are still running Methodist schools. For example, Trinidad, Tobago, Grenada, St. Vincent. Not St. Vincent, St. Lucia. And we are not running any Methodist schools to that extent other than the preschools in Barbados or St. Vincent. But we are interested in continuing to develop education in those areas. So we are going to be rolling out very, very shortly, within months, a comprehensive development program for our preschools. And we have also started to engage government in ways in which we can start bringing developmental programs even to the primary and secondary schools. So at the moment, we are planning to bring here to the nation at the beginning of October a mathematics guru out of Singapore, recognizing that mathematics is an area that we are struggling with. And the Methodist Church is leading the charges to bring this gentleman here. We have contact with him. We have a relationship with him, and he has been helping with the Methodist schools in the other locations where I had indicated. And we are hoping that when October and he comes here, that we can gather educators from all across the nation and bring them into meaningful workshops in that regard. Then we also want to continue working with selected schools, because obviously we can't do everything, to help them in development. We have a consultant, a top-class educator, and she will come in and, with the permission of the Ministry of Education, help to work in these schools, trying to bring to the fore hidden disabilities and how we can deal with those hidden disabilities in children, to help to move the whole level of attainment, educational attainment, to a higher level. So you can see that the Methodist Church is still about its agenda of social development through education and through social awareness of how we need to live our lives at a different level.
Okay, so there are some people who feel that the church in general, not just Methodists, have not been vocal about some of the ills in the society. How would you respond to that?
Okay, we are going to be moving to set up a special PR section. I've already spoken about it, PR desk. There are some issues that we will speak on. What we try to do, very much being part of the St. Vincent Christian Council, we speak through the Christian Council, but I agree with you that in some areas we have a right to speak on our own, and we will be doing that, okay? But we are part of the Christian Council, comprising of the Anglican, the Catholics, the Salvation Army, and ourselves.
But also to that, though, I would add maybe a bit, okay, I would simply add that a lot of the issues are often voiced on our pulpits on a Sunday morning.
Definitely.
But the persons who are complaining about what the church is not doing, they can complain because they're actually not in church, so they do not get to hear, you know. So perhaps you might argue that what we need to do is to have a bigger platform or to utilize the technology a bit more in more of our churches, so that the message reaches a greater segment, a greater portion of the population. But often the population is tuned out to religious speak, so to speak. And so, but the church is actually active, quite active in speaking about social injustice and matters like that.
If I could add to that, I think one of the criticisms that could be made about the church, not the Methodist, but the churches generally, is about the extent to which they are reconciling themselves to the new environment, social and other, and the fact that you live in an era when there's a lot more secularization, when a lot of people are now non-believers, and so that one should not assume that your message, as you were indicating, has to go beyond those people who come to church. And I think that is something that, well, for any institution that has been there for a long time, you have to constantly make that kind of adjustment and see in what way you could, how you could deal with the new challenges that arrive in that kind of environment. And I think that is a challenge not only to the Methodist Church but to all the churches.
Okay,
I think you're about to finish now, but I just wanted to mention something which I should have mentioned in education, because I don't think a lot of people know about it, is the Glen Community School, which existed in the 1930s, 1940s, which was, you know, it was not one of the ordinary schools, but the usual subjects of a senior department of a primary school, together with practical agriculture, carpentry, hygiene, cooking, domestic science, needlework, basket making, and mat making. And they were going to go to reorganize the school and to develop a secondary school with a hostel, but they never got around to that. And I don't think a lot of people know about the Glen Methodist School. So I just wanted to mention it.
Yeah.
Okay, so before we go, the future of Methodism as we look beyond the horizon.
It's interesting that Brother Adrian spoke about the Glen School and the very things that it did. We are going to roll out in a matter of weeks a program seeking to develop, nurture and develop our children and young people from infancy all the way up to age 25, called Methodist Seeds, SWDS. And this is a comprehensive program. This is not a program simply about religious instruction. Yes, it will have that as we seek to develop faith in person, but it will also have an element of discipline, an element of education, an element of employment, and an element of outreach. And we'll be seeking to get our young people to move to a point where they move away from crime and violence and things that are undesirable, and where they shape their lives across the board to be good citizens in the future. So it's a comprehensive development program that we will be embarking on.
Okay, thank you very much. I must say very special thank you to all of you, Dr. Adrian Fraser, Laura Anthony Brown, and Reverend Delaney for joining us for this evening's talk. So glad that you could join us. We'll be back again next week, Wednesday, at the same time, 6 p.m., for another edition of Roundtable Talk. Good evening.
In this Commonwealth Day service, Charles Wesley's great Love Divine, all loves excelling.